This is the Clutch Pick Sports Betting Podcast. My name is Sheldon Alexander. And as always, I'm joined by the Score's lead betting analyst, Mr. Matt Russell. Yes, there's still a smile on my face despite a down week for us here on the pod, but it's okay. We do what we can to keep the vibes high. A 7-9 record in week 4, bringing the season total. Season total still okay. Not mad at the season total. Sitting at 39, 24-1. It's all right. It's all right. I'm not mad at all. Mr. Matt Russell, how are you doing, my dude, as we enter into week 5 of the NFL season? I had to double check and make sure.
Yeah, week 5 already. I got to tell you, it's a good thing the weather is pretty good these days in, I think, most parts of North America, a little bit warmer. Because honestly, after Sunday, you'd wonder if the sun was going to shine on Monday. But yeah, sure enough, sun came up on Monday, got to flush it all out. Didn't really get all that much better with the Giants for me on Monday night. What a horrendous performance that was. Just an inexplicably bad showing from a team that, speaking of, you can't believe it's week 5. I can't believe the Giants made the playoffs last year. Like, that was just incredible. But we'll get to them. But otherwise, yeah, man, good. Like I said, still living and, got kicked around a little bit this past weekend. But you know what? We live to see another day, right? It's why there's multiple weeks in the season.
That's the beauty of the NFL. There's just always games now, right? There's just games like all the time. It's like you get a day off, a couple days off, then boom, right back at it again. Start thinking about the next week. And of course, as I always say, listen, kids. We talk about the good weeks, we talk about the bad weeks, but the season numbers are still okay. So we keep the train moving. We keep things looking forward. And for the people that might be new to the pod, just in case you're wondering what we do here, I like to explain it in case there's new people joining in each and every week. I'll come on. We'll go through the entire NFL schedule. I will make a pick for each and every game. And then Matt comes in with the information and education on where the line is, where it was, where it could be heading into kickoff. And our hope is we come out on the other end with a much more informed pick. That's the goal here. That's what we do. And I'm picking every single game on the schedule. So hopefully you're along for the ride. Hopefully during the weekend, you can go to the pod wherever you get your podcasts. Remember to like and subscribe. And you can scroll to, oh, wait, it's a 4:00 games. I need an angle. I need a lean on which side. Boom. Find the time code. Find that game. Hear what we got to say. Check the line. Check what we were talking about and what the line was then. And boom. That's how we try to make podcast magic, as they say. As always, we start with Thursday Night Football. I don't know how much magic will be going on here on Thursday Night Football, but we got the Bears at the Commanders and Washington at home, 5.5-point favorites. The Bears put together a solid half of offense. I mean, the Broncos had your boy, Justin Fields, looking like he was Patty Mahomes there for the first half. But then the Bears went Bears. They blow a 21-point lead. Their coach is a moron. I don't like calling people morons, but that was a pretty moronic.
Totally fair.
You know what I mean? Yeah. Anyways, if you saw what happened, you saw what happened. Meanwhile, on the flip side, it's not like Riverboat Ron was out here putting on a coaching clinic himself, whereas he had the opportunity, I'm sure you're going to talk about this, to go for the win, go for 2 at the end of the game.
Yeah.
Takes it to overtime. They lose. Either way, 5.5 points. Sounds like a lot of points, but there's still nothing that I've seen from the Bears. Or I shouldn't say that. There is one half of football that I've seen from the Bears. And that's still not enough for me to think that I'm going to be backing the Bears at any time soon. 5.5 points is a lot. It is. But I still like what I see from the Commanders so far. I don't like laying 5.5 points with the Commanders. But if there's a team for me to trust, air quotes here, trust on a short week, Thursday night, it's not going to be your boy Eberflus. Is that even how you pronounce his name? And Justin Fields and the Bears. So Give me the Commanders. I'll reluctantly lay the 5.5 points, but let's go Commanders.
Yeah, it's going to be hard to talk you out of that. I mean, we can't. Honestly, the next person who says even uses the term Riverboat Ron, even in like a sarcastic way, just needs to be like launched into the sun. That was an atrocity of a coaching decision. So it's that kind of stuff that, like, big picture, you just don't want to have to trust a guy like that laying points or to sort of do the correct thing that is to be optimal, because I watch every one of these games, right?
Yeah.
And even watching the game on Monday, right, as bad as the Giants were, right up until the point where Daniel Jones throws that interception, it's like, well, they could still come back here. They
Mhm.
just have to stop doing the dumbest thing imaginable on basically every single play, right? Like special teams penalties, like this guy's doing this dumb thing, this guy's doing this dumb thing, right? And so when a coach just does the wrong thing so blatantly in that situation, you just go like, it's really hard to win in the NFL, like even against some of these garbage teams, which, man, it feels like there's a lot of them, especially from a quarterbacking perspective, right? Like, who is good at quarterback outside of, sort of the five obvious guys, that we might say. And so, I don't have a problem with this number necessarily, but it's funny, like, you can have a bad weekend on, betting this stuff. And honestly, a lot of that comes down to stuff like, I sort of pinpoint like defensive touchdowns, right? Where,
Yeah.
you go through a weekend of college football in the NFL and you're just like, you watch the pick six happening on Monday night and you're just like, how many of these defensive touchdowns am I going to get hit with in a row? Like, when does my team get a defensive touchdown, right? Like, when does that happen? So my point is you can make these bets and they're kind of just up to, whatever happens on the field, obviously. But we have to remind ourselves that, like, understanding the market, knowing where this stuff is, like you said, point spread, where is it coming from, where is it going, et cetera, et cetera. And so this number creeped up and touched 7. And so as it was creeping up to like 6.5, 7, like the instinct is just sort of sit there, go like, God, like, I know the Bears suck, but man, that's too high, right? And by the
Yeah.
time you can kind of even like register that opinion with a bet, off it goes to 6.5. And you go, okay, well, like, you know what? That makes sense. Maybe the Commanders take more money and this goes back to 7 and we'll see where, and we'll try to hit it at that point. And before that happens, like as we talk about, right? Sometimes the betting market just doesn't have any chill
Mhm.
and people jump on the plus 6.5 and they jump on the plus 6.5 so aggressively that we end up, down back at 5.5. And so I think 5.5 is the correct number. And that's why, again, whether you're looking at it from a purely numbers, you've got a spreadsheet going, et cetera, or you just look at it logically and you just go like 7, like what? 5.5 is probably the correct number here. So I'm not going to, it's hard for me to talk you out of this necessarily. It's just more like, wow, we are in a rock and a hard place where, like, I'd
Yeah.
much have rather had the plus 6.5, plus 7, and under no it's like under no circumstance would I bet the Commanders at minus 6.5.
Yeah.
Right. And so, like, it's hard for me to be like, oh, now that it's 5.5, like, I'm kind of into it. Like,
Yeah.
no, that's not really going to be the case for me here. Right. And so then I look at it and I go, like, if Riverboat Ron, ya man's, launch me into the sun, like, once he's shown that he's not capable of making correct, in-game decisions, what else is the team capable of doing? And, we've seen good Sam Howell. We've seen bad Sam Howell. You're going to get good and bad Sam Howell. Like, there is a pretty large, disparity between the results that the Commanders are capable of because of Sam Howell getting a little crazy and Ron Rivera making bad decisions. And so if I told you that the Bears just like won this game, you missed it on Thursday night, and I told you on Friday morning, hey, can you believe the Commanders, lost that game to the Bears? Like, I think the answer is like, yeah, I can kind of believe that, right? Like,
Mhm.
I know the Bears are awful, but it's like, I wouldn't be that shocked if the Bears won this game outright, because we did start to see them actually execute downfield passing plays. Now, again,
Yeah.
the Broncos defense is probably just the worst, right? The actual worst in the league. I mean, they got 70 points hung on them at the previous week. Like, we're not exactly breaking any news necessarily, right? And the Commanders are considerably, better defense. They're going to get a ton of pressure, right? And so I just remember last year, this game was the game where the Bears kind of refused to run Justin Fields, and then they lose the game at home against the Commanders pretty convincingly. And then they go to New England on Monday night the following week, and they
Yes.
actually start running Justin Fields. You're like, I didn't know Justin Fields had this in him. And so I look at it and I go, like, is there a reason they didn't run Justin Fields in that game. I'm still not really sure why they haven't ran Justin Fields basically in the first, the start of this season so far in a truly meaningful way. So I go, okay, like I don't really know that the Justin Fields like legs, the run game is going to be necessarily working here, because I think the Commanders are probably doing something to keep him from taking off in that game last week. And of course, I don't like the Bears unless Justin Fields is running the football here. So this is a long way to sort of say like I hate both sides of this game, but like if for some reason the Bears could keep doing what they were doing last week against this Commanders team, and the Bears kind of said, they're like, no, listen, like we're going to get it going here. We're going to get going. And they kind of did. And obviously the defense is an atrocity, but who knows, right? I mean, listen, this is going to come down to both teams, both quarterbacks, and honestly, both coaches just doing a bunch of dumb stuff. It's probably going to be a fun game to watch from just a mockery standpoint, but I don't know that there's any like side that you have to be jumping on or that I could like talk you in or out of necessarily.
Definitely. And my angle here is like, if you're taking the Commanders at -5.5, which I am, just understand the game that you're getting into, right?
Yeah.
It's not a safe place to be, but just understand the game that you're getting into and move on accordingly, because there's a lot more games to discuss as well. As we got the Jags and the Bills back-to-back weeks in London for the Jags. I don't know why. Is this actually considered a Buffalo home game? Is this a Buffalo home game technically?
Yeah, on the
I
schedule,
saw that on the schedule.
Yeah.
So Bills are favored by 5.5 points here. And the Bills last week, okay, I was on Miami last week, and the Bills just laid the smackdown. That was a game in which clearly the Bills were like, we've heard all the talk, we've heard all the noise, we are going to just stomp out the Dolphins. And they did so. Massive props to them. This game now, we know the Bills are for real. We know they're good. Cool. I get that. I feel like it has to be some form of an advantage, though, that Jacksonville's just been in London for the week, whereas the Bills have to like travel out, get their feet wet, understand, just how to maneuver, how to move around, where you're practicing, what are the game times, adjust to the time zones, all these fun things that they got to do. And you're telling me I can get 5.5 points with the Jags? I'm not falling for the Jags because I feel like a lot of what happened last week had more to do with Atlanta.
Right.
But with my angle of always weird things happening in these London games, I don't mind taking the points here. I'll give me the +5.5 here with Jacksonville. Their defense hopefully can keep things a little bit close. Trevor Lawrence looked okay last week. Okay. Hopefully that can continue. 5.5 points is a lot for Buffalo. That I think this is a tough task, having to travel all the way to London and take on a pretty solid Jags team that's been chilling in London for the week. So that's where I'm at here.
Yeah, it's funny because last week we talked about the idea like how is Jacksonville on a quote unquote neutral, a 3-point favorite against the Falcons? Like that would take a pretty drastic downgrade, essentially off of one game against the Lions on the road, to get sort of Atlanta down to a point where it makes sense for the Jags, who again hadn't done anything to get upgraded, having lost to the Texans and scored 9 points the previous week against the Chiefs, where Zach Wilson can even score 20 points against them. You go, okay, so the Jags aren't going up. How far down can we take the Falcons? I can't get to 3 unless I start giving Jacksonville like a half point, a point, something along those lines for home field advantage. And they go and they win handily. And, you watch the Falcons, you're like, God, Desmond Ridder, yet another one of these quarterbacks that is just terrible. And you go, okay, like, I don't know if that has anything to do with like a sort of quasi home field advantage or whatever, but I know that staying there for a week has to mean something, right? If we were giving them a half point last week, there has to be a point, at least a half point this week, maybe a point and a half. Like who knows, especially given the travel for the Bills. And Bills coming off this big like divisional win, right? Again, we talk about sort of the jump and hug game where you don't want to be, dealing with the team off of a jump and hug game. You don't really want to be dealing off a team off of like a message sending type game, right? And that's what everybody's describing this game for the Bills. So like it's kind of just this really tricky spot, and you take out, there's a couple of injuries elements here, right? Where for the Bills, you take out Trey White. That's going to be a tough injury for them. Von Miller doesn't appear to be like he's ready to go necessarily. If he is, maybe there's probably a snap count, put on him. So they're kind of in this in between where they don't get Miller back just yet, and they have Trey White out. Maybe also, going with the DeMar Hamlin, having to start him, because of an injury to the back end as well. And you go, can the Jags take advantage of that? And from the Jags perspective, not an injury necessarily, but a suspension in Cam Robinson. They're they're starting left tackle, right? Like franchise left tackle. He's going to be back for this game. And so that gives them at least a better chance of stopping what the Bills want to do from a pass rushing standpoint and giving Trevor Lawrence more time to take advantage of the Bills not having Trey White. And maybe being a little thin on that back end. And so between that and just the fact that, like, based on kind of like a market rating perspective here, I have this game like Bills minus 3.8, like, again, based off of point spreads from the past. And that's kind of without even factoring in the Jags quasi home field advantage, right? That I think would drag this closer to 3. And, and my ratings, sort of mirror that as well. And so, essentially this feels like a game that has been boosted off of the Bills kind of stomping on the Dolphins a little bit, but just being in like a drastically different circumstance in, as you said, kind of that weird, very kind of dry atmosphere where like there's 32 different types of jerseys in the crowd, and like maybe there's more Bills fans than there are Jags fans, but like, is that going to really make that much of a difference? Because, like we said, a lot of these games probably get weird because of the circumstances around the travel, getting out to London and all the stuff that they kind of have to do. But like, if the Jags have already been there, it's kind of a been there, done that situation. Like, yeah, they might be live for a little bit of an upset here. And like,
okay,
that's just kind of how the NFL works, right? And so, I think there's been some 6s that have kind of popped up here. And it's, one of these things where there are certain point spreads every week where they don't really move and you kind of can't get an idea of like, what's a good bet and what's a good price. Well, there's been some 6s pop up in this game and they've gotten gobbled up pretty quickly in the marketplace for the Jags. So if we can find +6, that'd be great, because that's obviously sort of overtime protection. If we, if we were to go to overtime, and the Bills certainly capable of winning by a touchdown in overtime. So we're going to try to shoot for +6 over the course of this week here. But I think it's Jags or nothing here for me.
Sure. And we'll get to some of these other games close where it's more of a better example from what happened last week. But as you just mentioned that, looking out for the +6s, if you're listening to this pod on Sunday or on Saturday night, I guess, because it'd be very early Sunday morning if you're trying to get your bets in, and you see that it is now +6, obviously that's a benefit to you as the person making your bet at that game time, as opposed to what we're talking about here as we record this on Wednesday. So just always be mindful of when you're listening to the pod, what the line is at that point, and when we're recording it and what the line is then. I say all that as we move on to our next game, which I think is a pretty solid matchup. It might not be getting the headlines, right? It might not get the headlines, but I think it's a solid matchup nonetheless. It is the Eagles at the Rams. Eagles as 4.5-point road favorites in LA. Eagles remain undefeated after they won an OT thriller against the Commanders. Now they go head to head with the Rams, who also won in OT, an OT thriller of their own. Shouts to my guy Puka, who's putting in mega work for my fantasy team, by the way. But the Rams remain a frisky team, at least early on in the season. And while they're still healthy, their stars are still healthy. Puka's doing well, replacing Cooper Kupp, who could be on the mend soon. But either way, this game's frisky in the Vegas zone, and I like taking the home dogs here in the Vegas zone. Give me the Rams +4.5. As long as they're still healthy, Aaron Donald's still there to be a wrecker in the middle. Maybe they can slow up the Eagles' run game a little. And, hey, Matthew Stafford's still healthy, and they're able to move the ball. Give me the 4.5 points in the Vegas zone. I like it with the Rams. What say you, my friend?
Yeah, this is a tough one. Are we going to get Cooper Kupp in there this week, right? As we always talk about it, we're talking about this on Wednesday afternoon. We, an LA team probably any minute now. Well, they will take the practice field, and we'll see sort of what the optimism or non-optimism is for Cooper Kupp. And I think if Cooper Kupp is in, right, that offense gets a little bit better. But the other element for the practice deal is that Matthew Stafford was hobbling all over the field in that game against the Colts, right? And we talked about the idea of the jump and hug game. That was kind of a jump and hug game. That was a really interesting game. We'll talk more about from the Colts side, but that was kind of an interesting result, with the obviously big lead and then blowing the big lead and then winning the game in overtime anyway. I grabbed the Eagles -4 earlier on in the week here. I don't know if that's going to end up being sort of a valuable bet from like a closing line perspective, especially if Cup plays. I can imagine, some money coming back the other way. That doesn't necessarily mean I'm like committed to that Eagles -4 by any means, because if I can get the +4.5 with the Rams, like there's always a way sort of to get out of that for me. You'd like to be able to say like maybe the Rams and Aaron Donald are the team that can stop this incessant, tush push situation from the Eagles, right? Which is like always the thing that's like going to push them over the edge. I do have some concerns about the defense, right? Like we talked about Sam Howell and being like Sam Howell looking good against the Eagles was not something that I think most people kind of thought was going to happen. I thought that
Sam Howell looked really good, which is
part of the reason, obviously, is why I'm annoyed with our guy Ron Rivera, is because I had the Commanders in on the money line in that game at better than plus 350, something along those lines. And you just sit there and you go like, man, I think you had a better chance at a 50-50 shot here than you did messing around with overtime in that game. So I compare it to, think about it this way, right? Eagles -4.5, compare that to the 49ers like 3 weeks ago at the Rams at 7.5. Right. And I don't know that the Eagles are 3 points, worse than them. But you go, well, the Rams have shown that they're like, serviceable, right? Obviously playing really tight with the Bengals on the road. And again, I don't know if that's a good thing, right? Because we're sitting here in the first week of October and you're just like, we theoretically have all these data points and all these comparisons and be like, okay, this team can play with this team can't play with these teams, et cetera, et cetera. And, I'd like to think that like playing on the road on Monday night and like having a chance to win against the Bengals is impressive. But then I'm like, wait a minute, like watch every other Bengals game this year.
Yeah.
Right. It's dreadful. So like, why would I be that excited, about the Rams necessarily? So, a lot of this stuff, obviously, you have a rough week, you kind of get a little more fence city than you would be sort of, coming at it from a confidence standpoint.
Yeah.
But there's also just a lot of moving pieces with this, right? Because a hip injury for Matthew Stafford, we want to be backing Matthew Stafford when he's healthy, but Matthew Stafford, when he's not healthy, turns into the Rams offense of last year, where it just honestly was a struggle for them to get to 20 points. And 20 points is not going to cut it against the Eagles.
No, definitely not. It's going to be a crazy game for sure. And I think the longer the season goes, the less healthy the Rams will be. So I'm kind of like enjoying riding the Rams early because I know late we're not going to be able to be doing that at all.
Yeah. And is it already late? Right. And that's the sort of scary thing.
It's true. It is week 5. Good call. Good call there. Yeah, so Rams, what did I say the line is there? Rams +4.5 is my pick there. As we move on to the Chiefs, who are 5.5 favorites, not 5.5, 5-point favorites in Minnesota against the Vikings. The Chiefs on Monday night, that game to me looked like, the Chiefs got out to a double-digit lead and then got bored. And Mahomes was like, let me just see what kind of trick passes I could try here. Like he was trying to when they do the drills where you're trying to throw it over like the hidden objects into like a bucket or into the garbage can. Like he's trying to throw those passes over linebackers and, then he misses it and he's doing his arm motion like, I got to put more loft on it. It's like, bro, what's going on here? I'm trying to cover spreads.
I thought he was going to throw one around his back at one point just for fun, right? Like mix something up, I mean,
and that's before we get to him sliding on the 1-yard line to close out the game, which is a thing that's going to get all the headlines about covering or not covering that spread. But really, they blew covering the spread well before that.
Oh, absolutely. And it's funny, right? Like you can, people telling on themselves about like kind of being new to either like just betting in general or honestly maybe even football. I'll tell you, and if anybody's listened to the podcast even just last year, right? I've brought up my wife's pick'em pool league that she's in with at work that she won last year, and she didn't really tell me about it until like week 12. She's like, I'm in first place in this thing. I'm like, what? So she's on the Chiefs, right? And we're watching that game late and like going to bed, and I just turned to her, and this was like well before the play happened, you're seeing them on the 13-yard line with 1st and 10. I just said to her, I was like, I need you to be prepared here, because one of two things is going to happen. One, they're going to get stopped here. They're going to kick the field goal because Andy Reid's a coward, and he's going to want them to have a 6-point lead over a 3-point lead. And or two, and the more likely result that's going to happen here is you see that little gap between the yellow line and the end zone. They are going to get a first down, but not a touchdown, whether it's getting it down to like 3rd and 1 and running some like little run play where a guy falls or something along those lines, right? And when it gets to 3rd and 7 or 3rd and 6, and they drop back to pass, and you go, okay, it's really hard to execute a pass that like goes in that little space, right? Yeah. And so I'm like, well, maybe. And then he starts scrambling, and I'm like, oh no. And if there's, we always sort of go, okay, does this guy know whether to go down? This guy, running backs, right? It's like, did they tell him in the huddle to go down, or yes or no? It's like, if there's one guy, speaking of trusting, if there's one guy on the planet that I knew would know to like go down in that situation, it's Patrick Mahomes, right? And like that's what makes him like the best, because he's not only super talented, but he knows exactly what he needs all the time, especially in those scrambly situations, which are kind of amazing.
Maybe I'm giving them way too much credit, but I even thought the play design was set up for that, right?
I did
everyone,
too.
every play going to every single receiver going the opposite direction, and he just comes out the other way to his left. There's nobody there. It's wide open. Like, I mean, maybe I'm giving them too much credit, but I also feel like we watch the Chiefs a lot. That it's just, there's certain teams where you can tell their game plan. You can tell that everything is setting up something else. Right?
Yeah. If they can execute a ring around the rosy, like all the BS plays that they run, like they can work on this, right? We always talk about like one of the things is continuity, right? Like, and the Chiefs have such continuity that they already know their plays. A couple of new guys come every year, and those guys have to learn them, right? But a lot of it, when they lose, it's because like guys just drop passes. It's not because they don't know what to do at the right or wrong time. And so of course they probably plan that. And it's funny, like I didn't bring that up because I thought you or somebody else would be like, what are you talking about? Like they drew up a play for the quarterback to scramble. Not, it wasn't a quarterback draw. It was like a pure on, full on scramble. But honestly, I agree with you. I think that's exactly what happened.
Yeah. It's just a play where it's like, okay, here's your read. And if it's not there, everyone's going to one side of the field. This side's going to be wide open. And as you said, Mahomes knows what he's doing. We've seen it time after time. We say all of that to say they've blown
a pick yet.
No. But like they should have covered against the Jets, but they just didn't really care. They're just messing around, and they almost found out, but not really, because they're the Chiefs and they were never really going to lose that game. But here's the thing. Now it's 5 points. They're on the road against Minnesota. And I find this kind of weird because normally we talk about like the Chiefs tax, right? And like them getting a little couple extra points here and there. But here with this only being 5, I know for me personally, I would take the Chiefs by a touchdown. As you know, I like to
always will take the Chiefs by a touchdown. You'll take a Chiefs by an anything. Like, what do you care if it's a touchdown?
Right. So this is what I don't get. Like, is this just all strictly like backdoor cover Vikings protection here, that it's at 5 because they know if there's a team that's able, if it's a touchdown spread and there's a team that's able to come down and mess up that, it's the Vikings, and Kirk Cousins just boosting his stats in garbage time. He's made a career of it. Is that why this is 5? And I'm on the Chiefs -5, by the way.
Yeah. And it's funny. So we had that whole conversation. I sort of burying the lead here. I can't tell you how uncomfortable it is with that. I have a level of confidence that the Vikings are going to cover this spread the way that I do, because if you haven't been paying attention to the last year and a half, I am no fan of this Vikings team, whatsoever. That being said, this is not what we're normally seeing from the Vikings from a requirement standpoint, right? It's always, hell yeah, the Vikings have to win and they have to cover. And it's I don't want to do that, man. Because they always blow it. Or I shouldn't say they always blow, because obviously they had 13 wins last year because they won a bunch of close games. So it didn't really matter who they played, right? They played the Chargers, who are a pretty decent enough team, right? And it's that thing goes down to the wire. They play the Buccaneers, that goes down to the wire. Honestly, if you play that game last week at Carolina 100 times, we have no way of proving this. I think Carolina covers that game 80 times out of 100, right? Yeah. I would make that bet on Carolina +5 every day for the rest of my life until the day I die and feel really good about it, right? But like Bryce Young is, obviously pretty overwhelmed, and you get the that fumble that they return for a touchdown, right? If that ball doesn't bounce directly to the guy, into the hands of the guy who ran it back, like, I don't know that game gets covered. So, all that is to say, like, we don't get this whole like home underdog Viking version very often, right? Just because the way the schedule has kind of like fallen out. And as much as like they've kind of yacked up a lot of these games here, right? It's been interception. And honestly, they tried to do it last week with the 99-yard interception return that Cousins threw in the last game.
Yeah.
But there's going to come a point here where the Vikings don't have the dumb fumble or the stupid Kirk Cousins interception, et cetera, et cetera. And again, because we're not asking them to even win this game, we're just asking them to cover. We're just asking their offense essentially to kind of keep in touch with the Chiefs. Like, I feel weirdly comfortable backing the Vikings to do that. And as we're discussing this, I look and like, I think the market's kind of agreeing with me, because right now we're seeing a lot of 4.5s and some 4s as this line is starting to come down in the direction of Minnesota. Now, luckily, that's not crossing any sort of key number where it makes like the Vikings sort of an unvaluable bet. So we can still make this bet. But like, yeah, I love the Vikings certainly at +5. +4 is certainly fine as well. I think this game is again, doesn't matter what the opponent is, because the Vikings have the talent in a lot of cases to hang with some of these teams, particularly at home. I think this is just going to be another like painfully close game that like, honestly, maybe the Vikings could win if the Chiefs are a little bit sloppy again, like they were on Sunday night, right? And so like, it kind of sets up like a spot where, if the Chiefs keep getting away with this type of stuff, right? They get away with it until they don't get away with it. And like every once in a while, they just don't get away with it. Against Zach Wilson, you can get away with it. Kirk Cousins, like, you want to say like you'd probably get away with it, but like this Vikings team can move the football, right?
Yeah.
We know that they can move the football. And so whether it's a backdoor situation or getting a lead early on maybe a sleepy Chiefs team on their second straight road game of the season, right? Like, by the way, like, listen, I'm not going to besmirch the Chiefs or Patrick Mahomes. We just talked about how like amazing they are and how prepared they are for every circumstance. But like a lot of the Chiefs stuff, right? A lot of the Chiefs brand, a lot of their success is based on a lot of these home games in the playoffs, right? And we just don't, we only see them, obviously, half their games during the regular season are on the road. A lot of them against kind of crappy teams, particularly in the division where it's like that Broncos team, quarterbacked by God knows who, and like the Raiders, right? And then they play a close road game with the Chargers every year. And then every once in a while, they get beat on the road by like a Titans or a Jaguars or something along those lines, right? Like, when you're building your resume or your sort of the imagery that we have for the Chiefs off of a different circumstance than what we've got here, then that can kind of sway, your opinion a little bit too far to the idea that like, oh, everything's going to be fine for the Chiefs, especially when we just watched them blow essentially a 20-point lead. And it's just like, yeah, you know what? Maybe not everything is like super perfect. They'll probably pull this game out because, again, that's what they do because they have that edge over everybody else.
Yeah.
5 points is too many against a Vikings team that can move the football.
I'm going to say that I totally and wholeheartedly understand everything that you're saying here. And if this game involved anyone other than Patrick Mahomes and Kirk Cousins, you would have convinced me to switch this. The only reason I'm not is because I cannot, like, we just know the bid already. I'm going to be on the Chiefs, right? Like,
sure.
I can say whatever, but like,
thing makes a ton of sense, except for the fact that like we're not asking Kirk Cousins to do the thing that we're normally asking Kirk Cousins to do when we get disappointed by Kirk Cousins.
I'm going to say this. I was expecting this line to be like a touchdown or like a little over a touchdown or something like that. So when I see 5, that already tells me the spidey senses like something's off about this. So I'm taking the Chiefs and laying the points, knowing that something is messed up about this line already because I expect it to be higher. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and it should be mentioned that like, no, like there isn't anything messed up about
No,
it.
no, no, no,
Like,
no.
this
I'm
is
saying to my brain of how I bet
sure.
on the Chiefs. I'm not saying in general. I'm
Well,
saying in
sure.
my brain and how I bet on the Chiefs. I'm expecting this line to be
You're always
Chiefs
betting
minus
on the
7.
Chiefs. You're always assuming the Chiefs should be like a touchdown favorite, and then you're shocked every single week when they don't cover, right? And it's like that is the bet, but
That's
it's
the
like
bit.
it just needs to be mentioned that even I'll put it this way, right? Like from a rating standpoint, because I am so low relative to the market, basically every week for the last year on the Vikings, my numbers do say like again, if I was sort of rating this in a in a world where I was in charge of the sports book, like my numbers would come out to like the Chiefs being favored by like 6 points
I
because
got
that's
you.
how low I am on the Vikings in general. But the
Yeah.
setup for this game and what the Vikings are good at, like that
Yeah.
changes the calculus for me,
Mhm,
right?
mhm.
Where you go, like, I'm not just going to blindly back like a -6, power rating number because I know that it's not, that power rating it's the same sort of deal that I'm talking about with the Chiefs. My power rating for the Vikings being lower is because I want to be against the Chiefs, or excuse me, against the Vikings in like 80% of the time, right? Whether like them being a road favorite by 5, like last week, them being a home favorite by 3.5, them being a pick 'em against a good, playoff caliber team. That's none of these situations, right? This is a just don't like completely blow it here. Like don't completely screw this up to the point where like you're down 2 touchdowns late in the game. Because honestly, if I think I don't even think they'll be down 10, but if they are down 10, like I actually feel pretty good about them coming back and getting a score. And by the way, how many times do we see the Chiefs, like they did this weekend, like they're content to win by 3? And a team that is that content to win by 3, who wins by 3 as frequently as the Chiefs do, they're a bad bet to win by more than that because they are not. This isn't James Franklin of Penn State, right? Like dying to cover a spread,
Yeah.
so that he
For
can
his
curry
boosters.
favor for his boosters before he gets housed by Michigan and Ohio State every year, right?
Yep.
Like,
Oh
that's
yeah.
not, anyway, bit of a diversion there.
No,
Divergence.
no, no. It's allowed, man. It's allowed. That's what we do. It happens. So yes, another week of me riding the Chiefs. We know this happens. Um, the Titans. Move on to the Titans, who are at the Colts. This game's at a pick'em, and the Colts, Anthony Richardson, super frisky last week, leading the comeback. They almost pulled off the epic comeback. Last week, we discussed the difference of how much better their offense looks with Anthony Richardson, obviously over Gardner Minshew, just different dynamics.
Mhm.
We also discussed last week, though, my love for Vrabel and just, sometimes I'm just riding with coaches here, and we talked about how they would be ready to face the Bengals and Joe Burrow not being able to move. And you're not going to do that you're not going to surprise a Mike Vrabel defense. This obviously is a little different. This game being a pick'em's a little different. I'm interested to hear about the line movement involved in this game so far. But in just a straight pick'em game, I'm going to take the Titans here on the road and just win, baby, win. Titans defense, Titans pedigree. I feel like they'll have something for Richardson here, the rookie QB. And yeah, give me the Titans.
Yeah. So first of all, it's starting to creep your way where we've got it's more of a Titans -1 situation. Whether you win or lose, -1 or pick 'em, like I don't know that it's going to make that much of a difference per se. I will say this about the Colts, right? They lose that game last week, but like I'm going to have a hard time the rest of the year not thinking of that game and thinking that they won the game
Mhm.
because they were really impressive strange as it sounds, like in getting down to the Rams in a game after a jump and hug game, right? The infamous Colts
Ravens.
Ravens fiasco of 2023. And I can understand not being sort of up and ready to go necessarily for that game. But the fact that they sort of kept with it, kept going, and you watch the offense with Shane Steichen, and you can really see the Eagles in what they do offensively in a
Mhm.
lot in a kind of a weird way. Obviously, the talent isn't the same. Listen, if they had AJ Brown running around out there for the Colts, like now we're talking, right? Like
Yeah.
same thing with Devontae Smith, right? Like if they had those two guys, now you'd really see the Eagles in it. Like that's sad but true. This is what the Colts are missing. But what they aren't missing is I think they have a better plan offensively than the Eagles do, because I think Shane Steichen might be actually really good. Now, that shouldn't be like this crazy thing to say, given how good the offense for the Eagles has been the last couple of years. It's a crazy thing for me to say, as Shane Steichen used to be the offensive coordinator of the Chargers, and for my money, he was dreadful. But something happens when you go to work for the Chargers where you become like 27% dumber every time, for every day that you work there. It's a very strange thing. Where you're just constantly running 4th and 1 dives directly into the line, or
From
a quarterback. Well, I don't even mind that. I just mind that you've got your quarterback with an oven mitt on one hand trying a quarterback sneak. But you see the design plays, and it's like when they are trailing, or with the 2-point conversion plays, right? Like those things weren't even close to failing. Like that is easy money for this team. And so, like, think about it, like the difference between them and like the Commanders, for example, right? Where like the Commanders are like, shocked and appalled that you'd even suggest that they'd go for 2 because their guys are tuckered out, as if the defense wasn't equally tired, or as if they weren't, tired when they scored a touchdown from, 15 yards out to tie that game, or to come close to tying that game. So I just watched the Colts and I was like, man, this is actually really impressive. And it's a home game, and you could kind of tell that franchise has some energy. And when you compare it to last year, where everything was just an abject disaster, where they scored to make it like, it was a 23-8, and like the place is going nuts, and you're just like, is this the touchdown to tie it, or is this a touchdown to make it a 15-point game? Like when you're kind of watching,
like what's happening here?
Yeah, this is the first touchdown, not the third touchdown. Like when I was rewatching this game yesterday, and so I got to tell you, I'm really, really impressed with the Colts. And when I look at the Titans, it's like, it's everybody's so back and forth at the Titans. Like, God, Ryan Tannehill's horrendous. He can't do a thing. And then the next week they go home and they beat the Chargers, and he's pretty efficient. And then the next week they go on the road and they just can't do a thing against the Browns. They're like, God, this guy's awful. And all of a sudden the Bengals, as we talked about how crazy of a rating and a point spread, mix that went into that game. And then it's like, then they destroy the Bengals. But like, we talked about this, man. Like the defensive plan for Joe Burrow is really, really easy right now, because he cannot move, right? And they can take him off the injury report all they want, and we can just say that this is just Joe Burrow's existence right now. He doesn't have a calf injury. He just has he just comes with it, right? Yeah. Like it's like, batteries not included, batteries are included. Unfortunately, his batteries are a mangled leg. And like, that's kind of a really easy game plan to just watch on Monday, be like, okay, he can't do this, this, and this. Let's do this to stop that. And isn't it like the exact opposite here against the Colts, where it's like, oh, Anthony Richardson can do a lot of stuff. Mm-hmm. And like Shane Steichen's kind of a smart enough guy that like, if the plan is to just run the ball over and over again, like he knows that's not going to work against Tennessee's defense. And so like, I just go like, it's such a different setup than when the Titans are successful, where it's like, okay, we'll take it. We know we're smarter than the Chargers.
Yeah. Right? Yeah.
Like we know that. And we know what to do against Joe Burrow right now and the Bengals. Mm-hmm. And those are both home games. And then they go on the road and it's like, man, we didn't have anything for Deshaun Watson. Like, what? You know what I mean? Like he crumbled in the face of Deshaun Watson. It's like, I kind of think this is just a bad matchup for a Titans team that like, again, I think they're going to keep scooping up victories here, and they might finish, 9-8. And, who knows, that might be good enough to win this division, or it might be good enough to make the playoffs. And obviously a lot of this stuff, especially in the back end of the season, comes down to injuries and like who's still, capable, speaking of the Bengals, right? Like, I just think in this situation here, like, this isn't the same sort of way that Mike Vrabel hangs in as an underdog, right?
Yeah,
takes advantage of the thing that that you're kind of, the broken part about your offense. This is the kind of thing where it's like, man, he's just going to be sitting there going like, God, I don't really know what we have for this, right? Like, I don't know what we got to do. Because the last time the Titans faced the Eagles style offense, it was against the Eagles last year, and they got their absolute brains beat in, right? So like from a schematic standpoint, they don't really have an answer for it. Now, again, the Colts are never going to be as good as the Eagles as long as the talent isn't necessarily there. But like the Colts have some like a factory assembly line of giant tight ends that are just constantly wide open. another gentleman whose name escapes me at the moment, but like I was like, who's this fellow who looked like, he had some Mo Alley Cox vibes, but it was a completely different dude. He's just like running free, and he's a giant, and just people are bouncing off of him. It's like, where do they find these guys, right? But the point is like they have they have as much talent as they can kind of have right now, and they're able to use that as much as they possibly can, and they're doing a really nice job with it. So it was a weird win 2 weeks ago against the Ravens, but honestly, like, kudos to them. Of course, Matt Gay had to go and miss a field goal like immediately to start the game indoors this week. Like, how annoying was that? But
I was so mad. I was actually watching that as it happened, and I was like,
47 indoors. Nope, can't be done. 53 outdoors 5 times. Yeah, absolutely. Sure, why not? Just ridiculous. So, yeah, I mean, if that doesn't sort of sum up like the weirdness of
the NFL
dealing with the NFL, I don't know what is, but just when I look at this game, I just kind of really like the Colts in the circumstance.
No, I got you, man. I'm on the Titans barely, but the funny thing from what you said there was like everyone's gonna be 9, like you're saying they'll probably be 9-8. I'm like, at this point, I feel like the whole league's gonna be 9-8 or 8-9, right? Yeah. And that's just where we're going here, because there's like a couple teams that are kind of good, and then everyone else. We keep the train moving, though, with the Ravens and the Steelers. Ravens, 3.5-point road favorites here. And my initial thought here, I'm going to be honest, my initial thought is the hook. Home dog Steelers. Mike Tomlin's going to do his whole Mike Tomlin thing. They've looked horrible the last couple weeks. And maybe there's a world in which we get Trubisky vibes, and he might actually be able to do something that Pickett could not do, clearly. Right. Because it's not like they need much. But yeah, I look at this and the Ravens, I know the Ravens are clicking. This is one where I'm trying to talk myself off of, okay, we saw what the Ravens did last week, but that might have been more based off of whoever that dude was playing quarterback for the Browns last
UCLA's Dorian Thompson-Robinson, yeah.
He was doing the most, and by the most, I mean the least. Right. And the Ravens took advantage of that. Hey, no problem, a win's a win. But now as we come into this game, this is just me doing the classic AFC North. You're giving me you're giving me the hook over a field goal. Give me the Steelers plus 3.5 points. I can't say that I love it, but this is just one where I'm trying to like not overhype the Ravens yet.
Right. Yeah. And I'm with you here. I like the Steelers in this game, and the Steelers are a roller coaster as far as like, what is the market think of this team? What am I supposed to think of this team? And how are those two things, sort of convergent or divergent? And I just kind of right now, I think the market has them basically rated 50 out of 100, right? The dead nuts, even Steven type of a team, right?
Sounds about right.
Right. And so I think that's important, important thing to sort of understand. Like, does that sound about right to you versus like, do you think they're a terrible team? Do you think they're a good team? Right. And I think the idea is like, they're just kind of this really inconsistent sort of team, especially, I mean, offensively, they are bad, and defensively, they are pretty good. And there's kind of only so much one side can do to screw up the other. And, we talked last week about how they have moved from, basically a pick 'em in that game to the Raiders 2 weeks ago being a 3-point favorite, and then how we had to like readjust our thinking, and now the Steelers were a 3-point favorite because it's like, oh no, it's just the Browns and the 49ers defense, like that was the problem. And then they go and they get their breaks beat off pretty soundly by the Texans, and you're just like, okay, and we'll get to the Texans, but it's like, are the Texans really good? Where do we go with that rating? By the way, right, which we'll talk about here in a second, because that's going to get loose.
That's the next game.
Okay, there you go. Literally like a second. And so I'll put it this way, like based on the fact that the Steelers were 3-point favorites in that game last week on the road to Houston, and Baltimore, that line obviously moved, but obviously that was because of the quarterback, injury from the miscreant down to DTR, and that, line flipped. So that had nothing to do with the Ravens rating going up, up or down. And honestly, I didn't move them from losing to the Colts. I've just kind of kept the Ravens pretty static, because I think, when you're saying like they're clicking, I would sort of more say like, by and large, we know what to expect from the Ravens, right? They are sort of consistent. And so when I sort of stick them at 60 out of 100 in a rating, it's like, I'm just kind of good with leaving them there, knowing that like sometimes, speaking of bitterness about the Ravens Colts game, sometimes Lamar is just going to throw dimes, and then sometimes it's just going to not work. And who knows what's going to happen on any given week. So all that is to say, like, okay, Matt, like what number, like what's your number for this game? Like what is the market? What would you have expected of the market? What is your number? And both of them are Baltimore -1. So we got a pretty significant difference here with a key number that we're getting here with the Steelers. Okay. And this number was 4.5 on open because the assumption was that Kenny Pickett wasn't going to be able to play. Now they're sort of talking like maybe there's hope that he is going to play, but the man's got a bone bruise on his knee and they have a bye week next week. So it doesn't really make any sense for him to play. So I think there's a possibility here that he gets ruled out and we go back to 4 or 4.5 with Trubisky in. So from here on forwards, let's just kind of keep our eye on that to get a bit better of a number. Mm-hmm. But like, you can do the whole thing about Steelers and Ravens. Like it always comes down to 3 points. It's like, honestly, I don't hate that from a theoretical standpoint here, but like more by and large here, like I'm not bumping the Ravens up based on what they did last week. I didn't bump them down from what they did the week before that.
Yeah.
And the Steelers, like, yeah, I could knock them down, but like, how much do I have to knock them down because of last week to get to where -3.5 on the Ravens on the road makes sense to me is just too much. So whether you think it's -1 or it should be -2 or 2.5, like you're still on the right side of the 3 here with the Steelers, as you mentioned about the hook. So yeah, like to me, this is Steelers +3.5. And listen, in any of these games, right, the underdog always has a chance to win. I think the Steelers are in the same boat here, especially at a money line of better than +150.
And the thing too with the Steelers here, whatever the downgrade we think it could be between Pickett to Trubisky, I can't see it being that great at all. In just my opinion. I don't know.
Yeah. And if they sort of hint on that move is the difference between a 3.5 and a 4.5 point spread, a 1 point flip that's not necessarily on a key number. It's like, I don't know about you, like that kind of makes sense to me, right? Like, you're not looking to go from 2.5 to 3.5, but you could go from 3.5 to 4.5 with Trubisky being in the lineup because, like, yeah, they're probably going to do some different stuff with him. I'd like to think. But honestly, we never really liked the Steelers because of the offense anyway, right? Your guy, Matt Canada, is out here signing up for burner accounts with his work, email address. Like, speaking of guys like that we shouldn't really be trusting, right? Ron Rivera and Matt Canada, like, whether it's on the field or off, like decision-making, man, like think this stuff out. So
I don't know anything about Matt Canada, but I just think about like, imagine if he has like teenage kids that are just like seeing the headlines and they're like, Dad, really? Like you could have just asked us. We would have helped you out. We would have helped you figure this out.
Listen, I demand that he changes his last name because it's honestly, it's a tough scene for our great nation up north.
Very tough seed for sure. Yes. So Steelers +3.5 is the pick there. Let's keep it moving. We talked about the Texans, pardon me. And Houston is in Atlanta. Atlanta favored at home by 2 points. And you talked about it just now. The Texans, what do we do with this team? I thought they had a really good win a couple weeks ago against the Jags. Cool. It was like great story. Maybe D'Amico Ryan's figuring some stuff out, but it'll be a tough matchup for them against the Steelers. And then they just dog walk the Steelers. Coming into this game, I'm interested in like what the line is here because I don't know what I saw from the Falcons last week that would make me think that they should be laying points against, I don't want to say anyone, but definitely not against a Texans team that I think might actually be pretty good. I don't think the Falcons might be pretty good, right? Falcons laid a huge egg, and I don't know, this at bare minimum, the Texans team is frisky, right? Bare minimum. And I normally year in, year out, if you've been following this pod for a while, Texans have every year been a team I love betting on when they're underdogs. And normally they're getting like massive spreads. And now we're at 2. I'll still take that because I think they could win this game outright. So give me the Texans +2.
Yeah, they could win the game outright. And I always sort of talk about the idea of like, okay, follow the market ratings, build your stuff based on, what the point spreads for all these games are, right? And so obviously we just had it. The most recent data point is a 3-point home, even 2.5. I guess there was sort of, a lot of 2.5s in that game, but a 2.5 point home underdog to a team that we just pretty much agreed was a 50 out of 100, like just a meh type of a team, right? So you're going to sort of make that market rating. Now, I always also say, if you're going to be you don't need to be like way out on a limb on a team, right? Like if I said to you, hey, like, what do you think of the Texans here? And you were like, I love them. And I'd be like, okay, like, what is your sort of your own rating for the team? And you don't even have to tell me like why you like them or whatever. Mm-hmm. But like, and you're like, I have them as a 65 out of 100. And you're like, well, the market's got them at about a 30. So like, you're getting a little wild by putting them basically in like a conference final type of a level there, right? Like, you don't have to say that there's, you don't have to go nuts with that. You can just be like, well, I think they're about a 40. And because everybody thinks they're a 30, you're always going to show value on the Texans. You're always going to be able to bet on the Texans every week, and you're going to be able to win money on your opinion. And your opinion didn't have to be like a full-blown psychotic episode, right?
Exactly.
Where you're just like, I love the Texans, right? So it's like, okay, that's kind of where I am with the Texans with regards to like, yeah, I think they're better than the market. Like we talked about it before the season. It's like, yeah, I think they're better, a little bit better than the market does. Like, I just don't know what I'm supposed to bet when it comes to the Texans because like division seems a little far fetched. Mm-hmm. Like their win total was 5.5 something, 5.5, and you're like, oh, that's 3 more than last year. Like that's going to ask a lot of them. Mm-hmm. But if you feel good about them, that's cool. Then you're off and running with an over 5.5. So I say that all that to say, by the way, like I also wasn't psyched about the Falcons, right? We're sitting here with a pretty good number on the Bucks to win the NFC South at like 8-1, and they are currently like plus 150 to win that division after going on the road and knocking off the favorite in that division, the Saints, right? Yeah. So like feeling pretty good about not loving the Saints that much, feeling really good about not loving the Falcons. Like people were throwing money out of car windows this year to like bet on the Falcons to do things. And here we are. And the market rating for this, even though we dropped the Falcons to a point where, again, last week they were neutral site underdogs against the Jaguars. And we've moved the Texans up. Mm-hmm. And the market still sort of says -2.5 for the Falcons.
Okay.
So that's why if you're going like, how is this -2? And my ratings say 2.5 for this, right? And so that's me. That's the market catching up to where I felt with the how the Falcons weren't that great and the Texans were a little bit better than everybody thought. Now, if you just go based off of point spreads of the market, do you know what the number quote unquote should be for this game? 5. Atlanta -5. Like that's the that's the thought that has gone in. Like think about it this way: the Falcons were 3.5, 3, and actually I think it closed 3 at Detroit 2 weeks ago.
Correct. Yeah.
2 weeks ago. Now I understand. Like obviously things happen. They get housed by Detroit. They get beat pretty comfortably by the Jags. And people go like, whoa, let's back it up. Mm-hmm. Right. But I'm just telling you, right? 2 weeks ago, this was set to be -5 or maybe even something higher than that. Because listen, the Texans hadn't beaten the Jaguars either. And obviously hadn't beaten the Steelers. And they'd come off. They just come off getting housed by the Colts. Now listen, I like the Colts as much as the next guy, but like getting blown out by Gardner Minshew is not a good look. So so this opens 3 on Sunday night, and obviously everybody who thinks the same way that you're thinking, and then I'm in a lot of ways I'm thinking, gobbles up the +3, and that lasts. You're literally like watching it evaporate.
I'm sad that I missed it. Just listening to you right now.
I was watching it, and I was like, 3. God, I really, I really don't. And then it's gone, right? Like just take like 5 seconds. It's just gone, and then they goes down to like almost to a pick 'em. And then that's where it goes, where you look at some of these numbers as you're plugging this stuff in and you're like, market 5, me 2.5. Like, I got to bet the Falcons in this game. Like, you kind of get like bummed out about it. It's like, that's not a team I'm looking to get to. But like, then you just got to sit back and you go like, well, isn't that what the NFL is though? It's like, we all get excited off of like 1 or 2 games, completely reframe how we feel about a player, right? Stroud went from like, oh, I don't know, like not looking great through the first 2 games to like, well, wait a second. Like he's actually played pretty good in those 2 games, not throwing interceptions. And then that's turned into wins on the field. And so it's like, okay, well, is it just going to be smooth sailing for the Texans on their run to like the playoffs? And the psychotic guy who was like saying that I think they're a 60. Are they going to be a 60? Like maybe they're just going to be a 60. Like
shout out to my guy D'Amico.
Like maybe D'Amico's just got them running right up to like a better than average team. But it's like, how many times does that actually happen? Or is it more likely that like it's just going to kind of be pretty good one week and not so good the next week?
Yeah.
And it's going to be the same way for the Falcons, who like comfortably beat the Panthers. Obviously, had the comeback against the Packers, both home games. And then like if you would, if I'd said to you, hey, like they're going to Detroit and then they're going to London, and like neither game is going to go well, like would you be like, what? Not the Falcons? Like how? Yeah. I never would have believed that. Like no, you'd be like, oh, okay, like that probably makes sense. But it's like, guess what? They get to come home and play the Texans in week 5.
Yeah.
And I tell you what, it's going to be under a field goal, and we're going to get that value, quote unquote, because of those 2 previous performances. You'd probably be sitting there without having seen those 2 performances being like, yeah, okay, let's circle that. Give me the Falcons -2. Right. And that's just kind of, and it's always going to be uncomfortable because that's how betting works, right? Where like the most uncomfortable bets are the right ones. And so I'm sitting here telling you I'm going to be uncomfortable about it, but I'm sitting here telling you I think the Falcons have to be the play here, because this is going to be one of those games where the Texans lose and they're like, yeah, we kind of got a little too high, too big in on our britches or whatever, right? And it's just like, that's the way the NFL works. And there's not a bunch of these every week. There might not even be one of them every week. But like this kind of feels like that one where like the right side is the Falcons here, and it's in the form of a Younghoe Koo like overtime kick for the win. It's probably going to be a close game, but like this is just a different setup, like in a dome road game for the Texans that they haven't really had this year from a successful standpoint.
No, I got you. Texans will be in tough for sure. This is kind of I'm looking at this as a show me game. Let me see what you're really about here, Texans, as I will still be on Houston +2. As we switch gears here to a team that I will definitely not be on, which is the New York Football Giants. I'm not sure when I'll be on the Giants again, and I understand this is a big time line as the Dolphins are favored by 11 points at home. But I'm going to be honest with you, this is just a fade of the Giants. Daniel Jones, I don't understand the Giants at all. I actually turned off. I was on the Seahawks on Monday night, and I turned the game off and went to bed. I don't know in all the time
before or after the Jones pick 6.
After.
Okay, after is completely reasonable. That game was over. Fair enough. Okay.
But I'm saying though, in the time that we've known each other, I don't know if I've ever done that on a primetime game. Where it's just like, I'm pretty confident that this game is a wrap. I've seen enough here, right? Yeah. Like later, Daniel Jones. And I understand. Okay, potential. That's going to be, as bad as they're going to get. They could come back here, but I just feel like the Dolphins now, coming off a bad win themselves, I feel like the Dolphins meeting up with the Giants, prime for a bounce back game. Yeah. 11 is a weird number. I get it. It's more than 10, but I have more faith that if one of these teams are going to bounce back in a big way, as they should after tough losses, it's going to be the Miami Dolphins offense. And the Giants, I don't know what their offense is. I really don't after all these weeks. So give me the Dolphins laying the 11 points at home.
Yeah, I mean, what am I going to do? Sell you on the Giants? Like, and I'm not saying like, Dolphins, like, let's do it. But it's like, you're right, man. Like, of all the teams to mess with here, we talked about off the top of the show, right? Like the unseasonably warm conditions. If you're the Giants, man, you're going short week. You're going to go stand on that sideline in Miami on the sunny side while they're in the shade.
After you're probably hungover from a Saturday night at Live.
I'm joking. I mean, I don't know. Would you be able to tell whether the Giants are hungover, drunk, or like, you know what I mean? Like, you wouldn't be able to tell by their play. I mean, it's stupid play after stupid play after stupid play.
I'm going to double down on something stupid I just said here and take us on a stupid tangent for a second here. Can we retire the Odell Beckham Jr. photo on the boat? Like, this has nothing. What's happening now has nothing to do with that team. I keep seeing it every single week, like the Giants record since this photo was taken. It's like, what are we talking about right now? Like, it's just so ridiculous. and so dumb because the two things have nothing to do with each other. But I guess with it being in Miami, that's what made me think about it. So whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, I wish I had anything to add to that, but I just kind of don't.
That wasn't really the point.
Yeah, man. And listen, I talked about this, last week or week before that, right? Where it's like, and it applied to the 49ers, but for whatever reason, the Chiefs, tanked at the end of the second half of or at least the post 17-0 portion of that game, where, like more and more, like the NFL is like college, where like, I mean, just the fact that they scored that any team was able to score 70 points in a week was like, that's a college football score, right? Like that's Georgia just beating up on, Miami of Ohio or something, right? And so the idea that like 11 is a lot of points against a team like the Giants, who like literally do nothing correctly, shouldn't be as sort of scary as when it's the bad team who's like trying hard. Whereas like I'm sure the Giants would say that they're trying hard, but like, man, if they are trying hard, like that's actually kind of even more of a bummer than anything else. So yeah, like you're going to get the best, I think, performance from the Dolphins. You're going to get the added element of them being in the shade and the Giants being out in the sun. You're going to get the added element of that not really being a comfortable situation for the Giants, because it's not like they're a hot weather team. All they do is play primetime games in temperate weather because like, for some reason, because every time the Giants make the playoffs, no matter how bad the team is, we have to then see them 7 times a year in primetime for the next like 4 years. As if like we can't just think for ourselves and realize that Daniel Jones stinks. Everybody on the team stinks. Saquon Barkley's pretty good, but I'm sorry, you're a running back. You're just not going to be that effective relative to like actually winning and losing games. Like maybe to the point where you win 9 games, which somehow they did last year, which even as it was happening was like a very sort of fluky thing as we were watching, but we were just kind of like, ride the wave, like let's do it, getting points all the time and winning these games outright, like it's cool. And it's just like, yeah, but like when you're playing more than 17 games for a sample size, like stuff's going to end up happening here, right? And so one of these things is like the offensive line is going to get hurt. Speaking of, like if the theme is like coaches doing dumb stuff where to the point where we can't trust them, like running the stupid tush push play with a guy with a twig leg Daniel Jones. I can understand he's a big guy, but like I'm not looking for him to like move the pile, right? Like everybody tries to do this, and I watch every game in college on Saturday, every single game, just turning on 3rd and 4th and 1s that were failed tush push attempts. Like quarterback sneak it, but spread everybody out when you do it. Right? Like get into a 4 wide receiver deal where you're actually creating space along the offensive line. The whole tush push thing is like, hey, we're doing this and you can't stop it. And the only team that can do that is with a quarterback who squats 1 billion pounds, right? Like the guy is literally a championship weightlifter in high school. Right? Like what makes you think any of these guys are able to do the same thing? Like, oh, because we have a running back pushing him from behind? Oh, the 160-pound like guy that is hired to literally run in space is going to push the quarterback through a pile of 300-pound dudes? Like it shouldn't be banned, right? Because it's not like anybody other than the Eagles can actually do it, right? You have to keep the Eagles out of 3rd and 1, out of 4th and 1. That's how you stop it. It shouldn't be banned. Anyway, so they run this play without even practicing it. They're like, oh, we did it through walkthrough, as if like literally every other play is a better idea through walkthrough than this, right? Like this play as just a walkthrough is like, I don't even have a comp for it.
Yeah, it doesn't make
sense. You know what I mean? Like, and of course, 2 guys get injured on the offensive line. And it's like, oh, those guys stunk. It's like, you know what? Their replacements are going to be terrible. And so I don't know if Andrew Thomas, their left tackle, comes back in this game, but like, or these guys who were hurt on the quarterback sneak come back. But like, they had those guys when the Cowboys did the exact same thing that the Seahawks did, as far as like rushing Daniel Jones and sacking him 1 million times, right? And so, whether Jalen Phillips comes back or it's just, Bradley Chubb or whomever for the Dolphins, right? Like, I don't care. It could be, come up with 1972 Dolphins defensive linemen, and they could probably come out there and sack the hell out of the Giants. So like, listen, I'm not dying to lay 11 with the Dolphins necessarily, but like, would you be shocked if this game was 35-6? I wouldn't.
Right. Should be crazy. Should be a crazy one for sure, as it is most of the time when you watch the New York Giants, because we get them a lot in primetime. Not a primetime game, which I'm not mad about, got to be honest, because it's good to, spread the wealth a little here from the New York teams. Speaking of, we got the Saints and the Patriots. Patriots -1.5 home favorites here against the Saints of New Orleans. I'm not really sure what to make of both of these teams, but I do know that both of their quarterback play have been abysmal. Derek Carr is still Derek Carr. It was just weird watching Derek Carr sit in the pocket, take sacks, not be able to do anything. Then you got Mac Jones, who I feel like literally gave the game away to the Cowboys. Right? Like if the Patriots had any chance of keeping that game close, wasn't it? There might have been a couple plays in between, but didn't my guy go like pick six, sack, strip sack, touchdown, like on consecutive possessions? Like it's just, what are you doing? And the sequence,
bingo card.
I don't know if I've ever seen this in the NFL before. A quarterback run to one side of the field, throw it across his body to the other end of the field. They actually make the completion.
Gets away with it.
Instead of considering myself lucky, what does my guy do? Oh, let me try that again.
Yeah, that's our best offense.
It's like, what is happening? Like, I wish we had like the unfiltered. There's some due to NFL Films that has Bill Belichick mic'd up.
Yeah.
That like we'll never get to hear. That guy has all the jokes, right?
Yeah.
He gets all the jokes just hearing Bill Belichick just rip this guy to shreds. How am I sitting on my couch being like, where's Zappy? That's an actual thing that I'm saying watching that game.
Yeah.
Anyways, I say all that to say Patriots are 1.5 favorites. I guess I'm taking the Patriots in this game. I can't really say that I like it because there's not much to like from either of these teams. Patriots had injuries on their defense last week as well. Don't know how that's going to look. But it's like, if the Patriots are just going to lose, like, is it tank season yet?
I mean, that is like the chess version of this season, right? Where it's like, you just look and you see the writing on the wall and you go, there are too many good quarterbacks. There are too many better quarterbacks coming out of college right now than what we have on the roster. I'm saying, like, if you're Bill Belichick here, right? And it's so funny, like your impassioned, recap essentially of Mac Jones, and then just being like, "Yep, taking the Patriots." Like that's how bad it is for the Saints right now, right?
Correct.
Like it's like we'll do the Patriots, spiel, and then we'll say like, just copy and paste that and have it just be a little bit worse for the Saints. And honestly, like, isn't that what this line is all about, right? Because we talked last week about like 1.5 being essentially home field advantage these days.
Yep.
It's literally like these two teams stink. Neither of the quarterbacks, like at least these quarterbacks, like you thought they might be good. Now, I don't know. We're on year like 10 of being like, well, Derek Carr sometimes. And it's just like, check down city. Like, he becomes Andy Dalton. And like, again, it's all Spider-Man memes, right? Of all these quarterbacks just kind of being awful. So, I mean,
I'm sure he's a good locker room guy, though.
Who are you supposed to take in this game, right? Like, it's just like, well, I don't know about the Patriots. Like, okay, so the Saints, and it's like, well, no, I didn't say that, right? So, yeah, like if anything, the Patriots seem to be still trying. Like they picked up J.C. Jackson today from the Chargers because they tried to have the first ever all Jones secondary, and that didn't somehow work out with Jonathan, Marcus, and I'm forgetting another Jones, but all the Joneses on the Patriots, except for honestly the one that you might want to see miss some time. All the Joneses on their secondary are out. Judon's out, and it's like, all of that put together, you're still like, yes, probably still a Patriots 3-point win. It's like bad team at home. Like this sets up like the Jets game 2 weeks ago. Feel free to just go through the schedule last year where it's just like any team of like mediocrity or worse going in there. Like, honestly, except for Justin Fields and the Bears, it was just like, yep, short, small victory there. Yeah. Okay. 2-point victory, 3-point victory, punt return, at the death, victory, overtime victory. It's like, Yeah, it's probably just the same story. And it's probably going to be enough that people are going to be like, well, the Patriots, they might be able to hang with, fill in the blank team they play next week. And next week, oh dear God, I just looked at it. They play Vegas next week. And they go back to the site of the insane lateral from
Oh yes.
yeah,
Wow.
from last year. Oh God, what a scene that was. So yeah, I don't know what to make of this New England team. I think fundamentally everybody just keeps giving Bill Belichick the benefit of the doubt. And it's like, I don't know. I feel like we'd making a lot of money, man, if we had just been like, you know what? After Tom Brady left,
Yeah.
it was a sell.
It
It
was a
was a
wrap.
sell,
Yeah.
right? But
No, I hear you.
like you said, it's like, okay, I'm gonna probably bet the Patriots this week, and I'm probably gonna be sitting there like hoping Mac Jones finally like completes a pass to a receiver or like
Just hand the ball down, man. Just hand
But
the
it's like
ball.
that's not working either because
I
Ramondre
know.
Stevenson's like 2.5 yards per carry right now. And it's like, oh, they just work the run game. It's like, well, the run game stinks too. So, I don't know what to make of it. But yeah, I think it's probably nothing but Patriots if you have to.
Remember when Let Zeke Cook was a thing online? Sorry, I just had crazy flashbacks to like that being a real thing. Let Zeke cook.
Well, it's like we're just running out of answers.
I know,
here, right?
I
Like,
know,
what do we do?
I know. Yeah, so on the Patriots at -1.5. Moving on to the Panthers at the Lions. Lions at home and 9.5-point favorites. The 0-4 Panthers. I mean, they kind of kept it close a little bit last week, and
They should have
then
won that
just,
game.
Yeah,
They should have won that game.
couldn't make it happen.
No.
I can't believe that I'm seeing a line of the Lions laying 9.5 points. And I also can't believe that I'm laying 9.5 points with the Lions.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm going to need you here to talk me out of this because that's just where I'm at here looking at the Lions. And while I think their offense is really good, they put points up on the board week after week. Their defense is okay. They get some pressure with their defensive front for sure. This is more so just like I need to see signs of life from the Panthers that I haven't seen yet.
Yeah, and the thing about the Panthers, right, where it's like, we've talked before about the idea that like when a wide receiver goes up against a really good corner, we do the thing where it's like, well, he's going to get locked down like Jalen Ramsey. It's going to lock him down. Yeah. And it's like, yeah, you know what? But the wide receiver is really good too. So like Ramsey will probably win a few battles, but the receiver will probably win a few battles too. Like it's not going to be one of these deals like a Revis Island situation where we're just never going to see that, receiver fill in the blank receiver like ever again in the game. And so it's kind of like that, but with bad defenses where like, yeah, bad defenses, like it's going to be ugly against like good offenses, but it's not going to make bad offenses any good. And so I think we saw that last week with the Panthers where it's like, even if you decided that the Lions were a bad defense, I don't even know if that's necessarily true per se, but like I watched them at home against the Vikings defense, and I know the Vikings are a bad defense, and like did not matter because the Panthers offense is that bad. And so I just sort of look at this and I go, we talked last week about, the idea that the Panthers might have some success because if you took away all the million false starts that they had against Seattle the week before, they should be able to move the ball a little bit better. Of course, that was Andy Dalton. And I think the Panthers are better with Andy Dalton than they are with Bryce Young, but they're never going to put, Andy Dalton in unless Bryce Young gets hurt. And Bryce Young is not currently hurt. So he's going to play in this game. And the Panthers are going to go into this loud dome situation and they're going to false start a million times and they're going to put themselves behind the 8 ball. Meanwhile, the Lions are going to do Lions things, which in this case is like grind your face right off on offense. And they're going to hit big plays because you're getting kicked in the teeth over and over again by David Montgomery, sprinkling in a little Jahmyr Gibbs. And they're going to win this game going away. I'm more confident that they're going to win this game by 20 points than I am the Dolphins are going to beat the Giants by 20 points, which is like, the way people think of the Dolphins, again, I think they're a good team too. And the way that people think of the Giants, and yes, I think the Giants stink too, like is kind of might be sort of a weird thing to say that you think the Lions of all teams are going to like blow a team out. But like, honestly, the more you look at the Lions, you just go, I know people sort of shrug their shoulders and we're like, maybe kind of, furrowed their brow about the draft last year where it's Jahmyr Gibbs and you're drafting a running back in the first round and a like middle, like off-ball linebacker. Like, what are you doing that for? Honestly, the Lions are literally just drafting these two positions, using them for 5 years, not re-signing them, and then just using other capital for the fringes, right? Where the stuff where you want a guy for a longer period of time. And when they're drafting the Sam Laportas of the world and the Branch, the nickel corner from Alabama of the world. And it's like, those are guys that you're going to want for 10 years. And the first 4 years are going to be super, super cheap because they're apparently really good at picking players, which is why their offense and now defensive lines are so good. And so you just look at it and you're like, they're just going to hammer this Panthers team to the point where like it's just going to be too much. The Panthers are going to be in 3rd and long constantly because they can't run the football. They're going to jump off, a false start. And this game is just going to get away from them. And the Lions are probably going to win this game by not even giving up more than 10 points.
I got you, man. I got you. We're aligned there for sure. We keep things moving with the Bengals at the Cardinals. Bengals favored by 3 points on the road here. And the Cards got run over by the Niners. But I want to give the Cards some credit because they didn't just fold. They kind of came back. They made it a little spicy. They made Christian McCaffrey have to score even more touchdowns than he already had in that game. But either way, Bengals as road favorites. It's tough to see. And I get this line is probably, as you talked earlier about the markets and where the markets have certain teams, I still feel like we're trying to figure out, or the market is trying to figure out who the Cardinals are. I look at this game and I think the Cardinals as home dogs in this, I kind of love this matchup. Even if the Bengals win this game, it'll be very, very close. If you're telling me I can get 3 points, I'm going to take those chances with the Cardinals, who have looked frisky, who have looked spicy, versus a Bengals team that, quite frankly, has not.
Yeah, honestly, you're bang on, man, as far as like the Cardinals and stuff is concerned. It's the same situation as the Texans, right? Where it's like, you've been told all summer, and obviously we didn't just make this stuff up. Like, we've been told this all summer because of last year and maybe even the year before that these teams are bad, that they're going to be bad, et cetera, et cetera. But you know what? They change coaches. They go into the draft. And, in the case of, one of the teams, they get 2 draft picks in the first 5, right? And then the other team is clearly building, and we think that, okay, it's probably going to be next year that they kind of get that talent influx, but they pick up Josh Dobbs, who at this point is might be the top half of the league as far as quarterbacks are concerned. And they find a steal in Michael Wilson in the wide receiver position. And so you can't anymore go, I don't think they have any weapons, because you look around and it's Marquise Brown, Rondell White, and who? And the answer to that is Michael Wilson. And if you had a more fun name, right, then we'd all be like, yeah, this guy's awesome rookie. He'd be in the top 5 for rookie of the year, because it seems like he scores a touchdown every week. But because he's Michael Wilson and he feels like he's a guy who's been in the league for 7 years for 3 different teams, you forget that no, he's actually just a rookie. And if his name was Sheldon Alexander, it would be more fun. Or if his name was Matt Russell, it'd be more fun. It's well, those 2 names aren't even all that exciting either, but they're still more exciting than Michael Wilson, right? And so all that is to say, yeah, we're moving the Cardinals up here, and we're kind of chugging along and, giving them some credit here, there, whatever. And damn, were they ever close to covering that game. But like I said last week, it was a tough matchup with regards to the Christian McCaffreys of the world. And I think you're right about the idea that, I don't think the Bengals necessarily have that. It's not like you're going to get hit with Joe Mixon over and over and over again. Maybe you are. And they have a fundamental flaw in the fact that their offense is very easy to be prepared for with Joe Burrow. But it comes down to, for me, this, as it sort of often does, or at least it starts for me, with obviously the market ratings. And the Bengals have gone so far back and forth where it was okay, we come into the season there. Joe Burrow's fine. He's healthy. He's good. This team is a mid-60s out of 100, which is literally super, sort of fringe or Super Bowl caliber team. If you show me anything, you're going to be up in the 70s with the Chiefs and the Eagles and the 49ers, et cetera, right? And then they play that bad game against the Ravens. They play another bad game. And you go, okay, well, Joe Burrow is clearly not healthy. Then they say after game 2, they go, Joe Burrow's not healthy. And the line plummets to them being just 3-point favorites at home against the Rams. And honestly, this is a very similar line to that, right? In that obviously it's the exact same in that they're 3-point favorites, but 3-point favorites at home to the Rams is a very similar type of deal as 3-point favorites on the road to the Cardinals, who obviously are rated below the Rams. And honestly, who knows if that's even correct yet, but that's life in the NFL, right? We don't necessarily know for sure whether the Cardinals are or whether the Rams are better than the Cardinals. We just sort of think that.
Yeah.
So the point is the number where if this was literally last week's rating, right? The rating for last week of being a 2.5 point road favorite against the Titans. If that same rating was applied to this week, this would be about a 7.5 for the Bengals. So if you just switched, right? If you just switched the games in the order, we might have had a chance to bet the Cardinals at plus 7.5 going into last week. Now, of course, we see the Cardinals competing against the 49ers and sort of like the world's closest, 20-point loss, essentially.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's like no one's ever had a closer 20-point loss than last week. And of course, you watch the Bengals and you go like, no, it just still isn't right, obviously, for their offense. And so now like I said, we fling back, right? And it's like, it's probably somewhere in the middle. And the problem is, if it's somewhere in the middle, then the Bengals -3 is probably the bet.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? But if it's somehow even worse than we ever imagined, it's even worse than last week, or as bad as last week, right? Like if last week is just kind of as bad as it could possibly get, like, yeah, the Cardinals could win this game. Obviously, they could win this game, but from a valuable bet, i.e. something that we think is going to win 55% of the time, the Bengals are the play that we're supposed to make here at -3.
I gotcha. I gotcha. And as a Jamar Chase fantasy owner, I hope that would be correct. As someone making picks on this pod, I hope that is incorrect, if that makes sense. We keep it moving with the Jets at the Broncos. Broncos at home and favored by 2 points in this one. I'm on the Jets here, +2. The Broncos, I mean, they had a 21-point comeback against the Bears, and that had more to do with the Bears. I feel like at least they showed some signs of life on offense and didn't get blown out by the Bears. It might have been more embarrassing than giving up 70 points. But hey, I mean, some might say, no, anyways, we'll leave that alone. I won't make fun of the Broncos too much there, right? Zach Wilson looked functional for the New York Jets. And in this instance here, I still can't really back the Broncos. It was an ugly scene backing the Broncos last week. And I know I lost on the hook on the pod and then a push on the actual bet. But like, listen, I'm here on the Jets. I just look at this and I feel like Russ moving the ball against the Bears defense might not be the same against the Jets defense, which I think is still solid. I know it's not as hyped as it was at the start of the season, but I still think that as a unit, they're still a pretty good unit. So for that reason, Zach Wilson maybe gained some confidence on Monday night under the bright lights. Give me the Jets +2 here.
Yeah. I don't know, man. I can't, man. I can't do that with the Jets. I think this idea that like, I can't even wrap my head around the idea that like we could flip to a point where Zach Wilson on the road is a good idea. And
whoa, no such thing as a good idea. No, betting on this game is not a good idea. How about that?
I mean, fair. You know what I'm saying though, right? Where it's like, we just went from, I mean, this is a Joe Namath type flip, right? Get him out of here, want him out of the league, out of the league. Oh, wait a second. Let's keep him for 10 years. It's like, kind of felt like 2 quarters of fairy dust on that Sunday night. And I can't explain to you. Listen, a lot of lines and a lot of line moves I can explain to you, injuries, market corrections, et cetera, et cetera. I have no explanation for why the Jets took enough money to get down to 7.5 from 9.5 when we were on the pod last Wednesday before that game. Because like I can see how, you watch the game. Let me sort of put it this way, right? Like if I didn't know the point spread and you watch the game, you go, okay, I can see how they covered. 9.5 is a lot of points. It takes a lot to kind of win by 10 in the NFL. I can see how they'd cover. What I can't really understand and why people sort of, new to this sort of think everything's fixed or there's some sort of whatever. It's like, yeah, but how did whoever bet the Jets, which obviously wasn't the mass public, was, it was professional money. How did whoever bet the Jets on a number that, again, was fair based on all market ratings, et cetera, how did they know the Jets were going to have a performance better than expected and or the Chiefs are going to have a performance worse than expected, because that's fundamentally what we're betting on any given week, right?
Yeah.
And so you go, okay, what's the bar? And then are we saying, are they going to be better or worse than expected? And so even again, I keep referencing the Monday game because it is so fresh and is somewhat relatively interesting, right? It's like the bar got so low for the Giants, being 2.5-point underdogs to Seattle, that it was like, how can they possibly go underneath the bar? And then somehow they go way underneath the bar. And you're just like, that's incredible that they could go, the bar could be set so low. They could get every situation you could possibly imagine, even including the appearance of Drew Lock at one point in time.
And I know. I was right? Like, whoa.
And it's just like, what else do you want to win a game? Like, I can't help you any more than this, right? Like, jeez. Yeah. So anyway, the point is like, so Zach Wilson sort of just kind of shows up. Obviously, the defense gets a safety at 17-0, and you go like, you're like you sort of watch that game going like, I kind of know the Jets are going to cover this game, but I don't know how they're going to do it. And then the safety happens, and you're like, okay, but that only gets it to 15. And then and it's like, okay, they get one good drive, and they kind of bust a run. And it's like, okay, but we still have a second half to go here. How are they? And it's like, okay, the Jets defense does well enough, and another interception gets thrown, and you're like, man, that's really uncharacteristic. Why is that uncharacteristic in this game? So my point is like all of that stuff sort of happens, and it feels like the Chiefs played their like worst game possible. And more importantly, it felt like that was Zach Wilson's best game possible. And now you go to Denver, and Denver, at least for whatever you want to feel about how many points they've given up for the last 2 weeks, at least there's an element of like, we came back and we won that game.
For sure.
Yeah. Now we go home, and like, this is obviously a winnable game. They are the favorite in the game. Which,
they are.
Seems weird.
Back-to-back weeks is a favorite for the Broncos.
Right. And
what
it's
a time.
Favorite after losing, by 50, and then favored after, being down 1 billion points to the Bears. And it's like, yeah, we're still just running this team out. But it's like, that's kind of the point where it's like, okay, when your opponent is the Jets and Zach Wilson coming on the road, it's like, you can really start to understand. You go, okay, like, yeah, what was I supposed to do? Make the Jets a 1-point favorite? Like, of course not. So from a market standpoint, like, I have this 2.5, like my ratings who still like aren't that psyched still about the Jets. Keep in mind, right? The Jets market rating actually went up going into that game on Sunday night, right?
Yeah.
Because the line goes from 9.5 to 7.5. That's not a downgrade on the Chiefs, because the Chiefs won by 1 billion points the week before.
Yeah.
And didn't have any injury issues.
Yeah.
So the market rating had to go up on the Jets. And if you're making a reason for why it went up, it was because they kept the game relatively close with the Patriots the week before, I guess, right? That's literally the only case I can make for the Jets.
Yeah.
That's the weird part, right? And so, like, because they go up, that's still the only reason that this is 2.5, and it's 2, and it's like there's still a half point of value there. And then I go look at my ratings, and I go like, I'm not following that Jets upgrade the way that the market. Whoever was betting that on Sunday night, I'm not following that as a long-term thing.
Yeah.
And so my number is 3. And so if I'm if I'm only laying 2 and my number's 3, and I'm theoretically think that there's a lot of the time where the Broncos win this game by 3 points on, by the way, like a Broncos offense that everybody was worried about from last year to this year that has actually been pretty good. Mm-hmm. They're supposed to get, Justin Simmons back. They're sort of, probably their best player on defense. Maybe that makes a difference. Maybe just Zach Wilson coming to town is going to make a difference for the Denver defense. Maybe being back home for the first time in 3 weeks is going to make a difference for the Denver defense. That's what I have to sort of hang my hat on here.
Yeah.
I understand there's some excitement, I guess, about the Jets kind of hanging in with the Chiefs, but I just don't believe that's a long-term thing based on everything that I've seen out of Zach Wilson. So, I'm on the Broncos here. I actually like it a decent amount.
I got you, man. And I totally understand it here. I think I'm going off like if there's a team for Zach Wilson to look okay against, there's an offense, if there's a defense for Zach Wilson to look okay against, it might be the same one that pocket passer extraordinaire Justin Fields looked okay against as well.
Yeah,
or at least that's what I'm banking on.
But you have to factor in the other stuff that goes with it, right? It means crowd noise. It means, you know what I mean? Silent count. It means all that kind of communication stuff. That's
lots of other things. Yeah.
Not something that Zach Wilson succeeded with.
Definitely not. Sunday Night Football, big boy matchup. We got the Cowboys at the Niners. Niners laying 4 points at home. The Cowboys, I think that the Cowboys, I mean, they've looked really bad at points this season, and they've looked really good at points this season. And I think last week was a point where, it was very easy for them to look good. Coming into this week against the Niners, I know there's people saying the Niners haven't really played anyone, but that to me, it's more about what you do in said games. And if you're just stomping out teams every single week, then whatever, that's what you do. The big thing here for me in this game, as I'm taking the Niners and laying the 4 points, big thing here for me, okay? I feel like last week, it's Shanahan playing 3D chess where it's like, I'm going to just smash mouth McCaffrey over and over again, knowing that the Cowboys are going to be watching this game. And then in this game, Sunday night, a week later, he's going to have counter after counter after counter for everything that he showed last week with McCaffrey. That's just, and maybe I'm giving Shanahan too much credit, but I feel like those are the games that Shanahan plays where like Debo, Kittle, nowhere to really be found last week at all. Meanwhile, just here you go, McCaffrey. Here you go. Here you go. And now the Cowboys are going to come in and you're going to be geared up. Not that you're not always geared up to stop McCaffrey, but you're going to be geared up to try to stop McCaffrey. And they're going to have all the other plays. You're going to see all their other guys. You're going to see Kittle running free magically, somehow, some way. Niners laying 4. I'm on it.
So, I mean, this is widely available at 3.5. I don't know this 4 business got involved. And I mean, there's going to be a point here. I think that we might even see a 3 pop, but we'll see. And that I think that's a buy point for me on the 49ers at 3. And I think the more you talk about that, I think you're right. The thing with the 49ers, right, is there's going to be a point where the Brock Purdy stuff that somehow doesn't turn into a turnover turns into a turnover.
Facts.
But the problem here for the Cowboys is like that was going to be Trevon Diggs. That was going to be his move, right? Was to get that turnover, and he's no longer there because of his injury, his ACL injury. It's ACL, right? So it's like the turnovers aren't going to be as likely to happen, and therefore sort of the thing that we're kind of waiting for to hurt the 49ers is considerably less likely to happen, while the line hasn't changed from how we sort of view the game, right? So it's going to be very tempting to take the Cowboys. It's going to be very tempting to take the Cowboys on the money line. There's not a lot of, great sort of options this week when it comes to like mid-tier bets on the money line.
Yeah.
So people are going to look at that and be like, yeah, I think the Cowboys can sort of do that. 49ers are honestly pretty super healthy right now, right? And like you said, they've kind of been able to just use the first page of the playbook, or it's just the first chapter of the playbook for all season long so far. I mean, just think of some of these, as you mentioned, the schedule that they've dealt with, and that's great because you don't have to use all the fun stuff. I think the kitchen sink is probably getting involved here pretty significantly on Sunday for the 49ers, because like of the games that they kind of need to win to get the bye, because that's the stratosphere that they're talking about, right? Like I have a friend of mine who's a 49ers fan, and he talks about like, hoping the Cardinals lose or the Rams lose or even the Seahawks lose. And it's man, if you're worried about those 3 teams, like you've lost the plot. Like this is not what this is, right? The teams you have to worry about are the Cowboys or the Eagles, whoever kind of comes out of that division, or if the Lions get buck wild and put up like a random 14-3 schedule, right? Like that's what you have to worry about, because that's the league that you're playing in. If you're the 49ers, you're playing in the how do we get a first round bye and a home field throughout the playoffs situation. And like this is that game. So like, do you want to be going up against the 49ers when they're going into page, chapter 12 of the playbook, and you're without your top corner? No, I don't want to do that. And the defense is healthy. And, by the way, the 49ers haven't again, like haven't played much as far as like opponents are concerned, and they haven't had to do any of this stuff, and they've been able to sit guys whenever they want to sit them. And like Nick Bosa is, kind of full, mid-season form type of thing. Like I certainly don't. So like, yeah, 3.5 is going to feel like a lot of points, but honestly, I think the 49ers win this game pretty comfortably. And as much as I would like to just start throwing the Cowboys, into like, round robin underdog money line parlay, it's like, no, man, I want to be on the 49ers side here because, again, maybe we're giving too much credit to Shanahan, but like, I think he's going to have the good stuff ready on Sunday night.
Yeah. And after like McCaffrey's third touchdown or whatever it was, I was like, hold on. Who did they play next? Oh, I see what's going on here. Okay, let's go. I'm just saying, I watched too much of the Niners to see just the counters to everything. And it's like, I've seen no Kittle, no Debo. Ayuk came back and they've been crushing him. He's been awesome.
And the Cowboys were like befuddled by the Cardinals run offense 2 weeks ago.
Correct.
We're like, Rondale Moore's coming across the line of scrimmage, and they're like, I don't know where I'm supposed to be.
Yeah.
Like that's all you're getting from the 49ers on Sunday night.
A very, very good reminder there for sure. One last game on the docket, and it's Monday Night Football. Packers 2-point favorites on the road in Las Vegas. The Packers got a week. They get a week to settle things down after a not so good of a showing, but you're going from Thursday to Monday, primetime slot. You're in Vegas. Josh McDaniels is super rattled, throwing his rookie QB under the bus, probably trying to mask his own just mess ups because it's not like he's out here, putting on a Belichick type clinic here. But either way, I'm on the Packers. I still like the Packers. I still think that what they have this season, the Sheldon market of the Packers hasn't gone anywhere yet. I'm still here. And especially when we're talking about going up against the Raiders. Yeah. Give me the Packers here. -2. No, I have no problems here laying 2 points with the Packers in this game.
Yeah. Very sort of Steelers-y from a couple of weeks ago, right? Where it's, and I don't mean from a point spread standpoint, because we haven't seen the Raiders shoot up to -3. It is the same deal every week with the Packers, right? Where it's like,
who's healthy?
Yeah, who's healthy? We start the week with the good rating, right? So this isn't quite the Joe Burrow Bengals situation, but like we always start the week with the good Packers rating, and then the Packers rating precipitously drops as we find out that this guy, and this guy don't play, right? And then they have the sort of mini bye week, if you will, and it's like Jair Alexander, he's in practice. It's like, okay, go on. And it's like Elton Jenkins, he's in practice. You're like, and then like Aaron Jones and Christian Watson, like whatever snap count they might have been on last week, like looks like they're, unscathed from the Lions game and like they should be good to go. And it's like, tell me more. And it's like, sorry, that's all we've got. That's literally all the injured guys outside of obviously Bakhtiari, who seems to be out for the year, which honestly really isn't that much of a surprise. So again, like the closing line that made the Lions the favorite on Thursday night. And listen, I should have known that the weekend was going to go. The weekend was the way the weekend went, just off of that Packers first half performance against the Lions.
Yeah.
But like, I don't believe that the Raiders have, for example, what the Lions do defensively to take advantage of the offensive line woes of the Packers, right? Like the Packers are going to be able to run the football against the Raiders, right? So, I mean, if you watch the first drive of the Chargers-Raiders game, it was like the Raiders were like, thought they could just skip the game if they just let the Chargers score as easily as possible. But it's like, oh, we have to play 60 minutes. And then I guess we should try. And honestly, I don't know if it tells you more about the Chargers or whatever, the fact that the Raiders probably should have covered all numbers, let alone pushing the closing line of 7 in that game. So like, honestly, I don't know that there's, you mentioned like throwing his quarterback under the bus. Is there really that much of a difference between Jimmy Garoppolo and Aiden O'Connell? Like not relative to the amount of points that like the line would shift if one or the other plays. Like speaking of bets, I would make 1,000,000 times over again. I'd make Raiders +7 a bet 1,000,000 every day for the rest of my life as well with Aiden O'Connell, even watching him struggle to get the ball out a lot of the time. Right. It was just like the amount of stuff that it took for the Chargers to even sort of win by that level of a margin. I mean, geez.
Chargers going to Charger.
I can't. Yeah, I'm sad. I'm sorry for even bringing up the Chargers on a bye week, right? So yeah, like, is this number like a little bit quote unquote too high for the Packers based on all of the previous numbers? Like, yeah, it is. But it's also supposed to be the best version of the Packers that we've gotten, right?
Yeah.
So, like, yeah, if it was, again, the injured version, like maybe it's pick 'em, right?
Yeah.
And as long as it's not 3, I think we're still good to go here on the Packers having not just the extra, few days off because they play on Sunday, but extra getting Monday night. And when I mentioned like it's kind of Steelersy, where it's going to be like, yeah, it's probably the best they're going to look going to Las Vegas, in the same way the Steelers offense was the best it's going to look. And honestly, you're probably going to get a bleep ton of Packers fans in Las Vegas, right? Because if there was ever a on the road destination, right?
Yeah.
Honestly, any road team, but certainly one that has the following that the Packers do. I think you're going to get sort of at least 50% Packer fans in the building there. So going to feel a lot like that Steelers game from 2 weeks ago, where the Steelers won pretty comfortably, and I think the Packers do the same.
Yeah, looking forward to a great week of football, week 5 of the NFL. And of course, as always, we mentioned that, there's going to be a lot going on line movement wise between now and then. Where can the people find you online to, discuss the inner workings of said NFL, maybe some college football stuff along the way as well? Where can they find you?
How about a little hockey, Shell? How about some NHL?
Huh?
Yeah, that's a thing that's starting next week, right?
Crazy.
So wrote a little piece today. Don't know when it's going to be up necessarily, but it's sort of a setting up how to make NHL money lines. I know this is probably sort of lost on a lot of people from a football standpoint, but it's, you hopefully people who followed me at mrussauthentic on Twitter and at the score and have read my stuff, have probably read the How to Make a Point Spread article from August. If you haven't, go back and check that out. Not hard to find. But there's also going to be a new one, How to Make NHL Money Lines, talking about the ins and outs on that. So, as we like to say, right, everybody likes to stay in the space, right? We're teaching people how to fish, not giving them a fish. Can't say I'm super excited for the NHL season to necessarily start, because we're certainly mega deep into college football and the NFL, but just another thing added to the plate over at the Score.
Nothing wrong with that. I totally get it, my dude. Totally get it. Lots going on as we head into week 5. And of course, you can follow me on the app formerly known as Twitter at Shell Alexander, and on Instagram at Shell Alexander. I mean, there's lots going on. So maybe you'll be able to find the whole grain goodness, me complaining, me being mad about, well, actually this Sunday wasn't too bad. Waking up and seeing the other way, and I would have been even more mad watching the cartoons losing a bet while they're playing cartoons. That would have been even more frustrating, but it was okay to be on the other side, right? But as I always say, I used to pray for times like this to rhyme like this. This is the Clutch Picks Sports Betting Podcast, as always, unpolished and unapologetic. Until next time, see ya.